Hey, listeners, right at the top of the show, we wanted to tell you about a cool thing that we've got going on in February, and that is a new online e-learning course called The Essential Guide to Landscape Design. It's with award-winning garden designer Courtney Olander. Carol, you know Courtney, right?
Absolutely. Courtney has written many design articles for us. She is a wonderful landscape designer based in Seattle, and just in the last issue, she talked about a solution to an entryway problem, which was it was so brilliant. And I would love to learn how she thinks.
Yeah, exactly. And I got a peek at her course and I got to see this course. It's over 4 hours of instruction. She really talks about if you want to start a brand new garden, but then for people like us who have an established garden, but you just want to take it to the next level. And the great part about this Essential Guide to Landscape course is that Courtney is doing Q&As too. So if you have particular questions that you want a landscape designer to solve, you have that opportunity. So go to finegardening.com/landscape design to get registered today. Again, the course starts February 22nd and it's sponsored by Monrovia Plants. Hello and welcome to another episode of Let's Argue About Plants, the podcast for people who love plants.
But not always the same ones. I'm Carol Collins. I'm associate editor of Fine Gardening magazine.
Hey everybody, it's Danielle. I'm the executive editor here at FG. You all know who we are by this point, don't you? You do. We can probably stop doing that, but who knows? It might be your first episode listening. So Carol and I are here today to talk about plants that will take winter's worst. And for those of you who think you have deja vu from the previous episode, which was winter stunners, no, dear listener, this is totally different. These are those plants that, are you in an area where the snowplow likes to, throw 15 feet of snow on top of your plant? This plant will make it. Or are you in an area that, come on, Carol, help me out with another winter condition.
Ice, snow,
snow.
hail, sleet.
It's like whatever they say the mailmen will still deliver in. This is what these plants will still deliver. Oh, desiccating winds. That's another one. Winter desiccation. Yeah, these are plants that just, they're tough. They're super tough. And we decided to do that because, it's winter. What else are we talking about in the end of January? We're going to talk about plants that are still holding their own despite the terrible, awful, no good, whatever else the Grinch says, winter conditions that we have going on right now. So, Carol, what is holding its own right now in your garden as you look out that window?
So I'm actually starting out with a plant that I encountered on a photo shoot years ago. And this was a fun article. So I was assigned an article on winter color. And I went up to Ontario. I went to 3 places. I went to the Toronto Botanic Garden. I went to Whistling Gardens in Wilsonville, Ontario. And then I went to the Royal Botanical Gardens Rock Garden in Burlington, Ontario. And I was just wandering around with my camera looking for winter color. And that's when I came across this plant. And it is rosemary willow. So that's a salix eleagnos. And there's 2 ways to spell eleagnos, and both are correct. There's one that has an extra A in there. But anyway, right? So I put the one with the extra A in the show notes, y'all. But you can take out that extra A if it offends you. Anyway.
Who doesn't like an extra A? I love an extra A.
It is hardy from zones 4 to 8. So it is super cold hardy. It's native to the UK and it grows in floodplains in its natural habitat, but in the garden, it is adaptable to wet or dry soil. It's fine in full sun. It's fine in partial shade. This is a nice small shrubby willow. It's not a tree, so it can get maybe 10 to 15 feet tall, 15 to 20 feet wide eventually. And so this I saw growing middle of winter at the Toronto Botanic Garden. And the winter stems are this gorgeous, like sort of a honey color, hint of red. They're real, like they're wispy, long stems, like, willowy stems. And you see the little scales for where the leaves are going to come out in the spring, but it's a nice texture to have in the winter landscape, similar to those red twig dogwoods that we were talking about in the last episode. But instead of the dogwood, it's a willow, and you can enhance that winter twig color with some rejuvenation pruning, and it's quite vigorous. In the summer, this is another reason this plant is a nice, useful plant, because it has a totally different personality in the summer. In the summer, it has, the typical ribbony willow leaves that are silvery gray and white underneath. And so particularly when there's air movement, you'll get that sort of fluttery, shimmering white, like glamorous look. And so it makes a really nice backdrop for darker colored plants or, conifers, anything with a different color or texture. But then it has this like hidden secret identity of the winter twigs as well. Yeah, I thought it was a fun, unexpected plant. I had never seen it or noticed it before I came across it at the Botanic Garden, but I think people do use it quite a bit, really more for its summer interest than its winter interest.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to provide kind of that perfect foliage foil for a lot of things, because it's going to have almost, even though it's dense, it's going to have kind of a fine texture because of those willowy leaves to it. But then bonus of getting, red twigs in winter as well. And I love that you're like, Fine Gardening sent me to the upper regions of North America on a photo shoot. Here's what I want to know. Was it so cold that your camera stopped working at certain points and you had to warm up the battery in your hands?
No, it was not that bad, but it was definitely winter. This was one of my favorite photo shoots. It was so different than our normal photo shoots. And morning comes a little later in the middle of winter than in the middle of summer when we're usually out there shooting. So that was nice too.
That is so cool. I love it. And I love that it's a plant that, I'm not familiar with at all. I'm excited to go to the show notes. Listeners, our plug, go to finegardening.com. You can get a plant list and you can see photos of all these plants as well. You go right to finegardening.com. We've got a podcast tab. We make it very click friendly, so you don't have to go searching on our website. All right. So, I felt like I needed to talk about an epimedium, because I think epimediums are just really, really, they're evergreen perennials that look like they shouldn't be tough, but they are stinking tough, particularly in dry winters with seriously cold temperatures and desiccating winds. It is remarkable how well epimediums do in those conditions. Whereas, some of my evergreen gingers, for instance, if we're getting a really dry winter with extended periods of cold and windy, those gingers look really worse for wear, and they're supposed to be evergreen. But epimediums just shine on through. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. They're a tough plant for dry shade, and they do really, really well through winter's worst. So the random cultivar I decided to feature is Ninja Stars. I love that name. So that's Epimedium Ninja Stars in zones 4 to 9, maybe zone 3. It might be worth testing out because several chunks of epimediums do well in zone 3 as well. This particular one is one that has those larger lance-shaped leaves as opposed to the little rounded heart shapes. And along those lance-shaped leaves that are bright green, they have these really cute, I'll call them cute, little thorns or little teeth or spikes or whatever you want to say that are all along the edge. They kind of outline the leaves. It gives it just a little bit more interest. It kind of harkens back to the stem color. The stem color is a little bit more in that taupey yellow range as well. This particular variety makes a lovely 15-inch by 15-inch clump. So it's got some presence, and if you only got a few inches of snow, it's still perking up along up on top of that snow pile a little bit. But in spring, the leaves actually, a lot of the leaves will kind of brown out, and then you go in and you clip away some of those leaves. Some of them will stay green and intact, but any of the new foliage that it pushes up and kind of covers over that brownish faded foliage is going to be bright red, kind of a burgundy, very, very eye-catching red. So that's awesome in spring, kind of interesting. And then eventually those leaves fade into that bright green color. But that's also what it puts on its flower show. So these beautiful fairy-like star flowers float in masses, clouds of stars on wiry stems above the whole mound of foliage that's produced in spring. Generally a little bit for us, on the East Coast, a little bit mid to late spring. It really depends on, how warm of a spring we have. But really, I walked around my garden, and it's an unsung hero, these epimediums that I have. I've got a couple of different kinds, and, I truly appreciate when I walk around and, it's like nothing ever happened. They're like, 0 degrees, no big deal. No water, I'm fine. And just looks really, really interesting and gives some nice structure and evergreen presence in the garden. Carol, I know you went to the Epimedium of all Epimedium gardens for an article several years ago, right? And got to see every kind of Epimedium on the planet, right?
Yes, and that was the way I remember when Epimediums bloom is that they have their big open day around Mother's Day. And so some of them bloom before that and some after, but that's when you can see sort of the most of them, at their peak bloom. And it was spectacular.
I wish they got a little bit more love. I mean, maybe they do. Maybe I'm remiss in saying that, people don't love epimediums enough, but really, hey, also deer resistant. That's right. Deer resistant. Maybe it's those spikes, but I don't think so, because deer don't eat the heart-shaped ones without the spikes on the leaves either. They're crunchy. Maybe that's why. They're really an unappetizing leaf to eat. So there you go. Another bonus point for epimediums. Carol, this is very unexpected. You started with a woody and I started with a perennial. So we might need to get back to normal days. What do you have next on your list?
I do have a perennial next.
And,
I love my perennials. Like, my young garden, that's most of what it is. So I chose smooth blue aster, and I do grow this, but I also took photos of it when I was on that epic Ontario photo safari, because it's obviously, a smooth blue aster has beautiful blue aster flowers late in the season, but in the winter, those turn into these like cute, fluffy little seed heads. And they kind of, to me, they look like, little silvery stars against the, dead foliage. But I think it's really worth leaving these standing, not only for the interest that they add, but I feel like they also hold fallen leaves around the crown of the plant, which is, I think, helps the plant to be more winter hardy. And I think it also provides habitat for a lot of those pollinators and other little beneficial critters that like to, hide out in the leaf litter until spring. So I will leave this standing until I see pollinators flying around reliably in the spring, and that may be later than most of us really want to leave something that looks like this standing, because in the spring you want it to look like spring. But I think this is a good plant to leave it a little bit longer. So this one is super hardy though. It is hardy from zones 3 to 8. And because it's a perennial, the top dies back in the winter, which helps it, it can survive like pretty much any winter weather, dry, cold, wet. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter. And it's a nice size. It gets 2 to 4 feet tall, 1.5 to 2 feet wide. And so it's a narrow, tall plant, and it really benefits from growing in a matrix with others of its species or grasses or something to hold it up. Otherwise, it does tend to flop over, especially in richer soil. Super unfussy, though, about soil in general. And it's a widely distributed North American native. And so the pollinators where you live, chances are they know what to do with this plant. It's so easy to grow. It was featured in the article we did with Bill Carter in issue 168 on native perennials to grow from seed. And some of the ones that I have bought, mature plants, but I've also grown this from seed. And although it takes some time, you can totally do it. The flowers, small but pretty, and I put a photo in the show notes so that you can see the seed heads and the flowers. But just like a cute, useful North American native plant.
Nice. Carol, is it one of the the perennials that holds on to the seed heads and actually provides some like bird value too? I mean, will you see the birds going after what's left of those seed heads into winter?
Absolutely, yes. The little seed-eating birds really do seem to hang around it. I keep it, it's in a bed with like plenty of other native plants that also have seed heads, so it's part of the buffet.
It's a smorgasbord. I love it. So and I feel like people might have seen the title of this episode, for Winter's Worst, and just assumed that, we were going to go the evergreen range or something in that range. But, it's important to talk about these plants that, are standard, quote unquote, perennials. But a lot of times, many perennials don't make it through the winter. I mean, we've all suffered losses in the past from, be it a wet winter or a dry winter or something like that. So, it's important to talk about these deciduous or die to the ground perennials that'll still come right back again. Well, with that said, I'm going to talk about a woody plant, but I'm going to talk about something that I was shocked that is actually really capable of surviving poor winter conditions, when I thought for sure when I bought it and planted it that this was just going to be, it might be a goner or it might be really ugly and struggle to get through our winters here in New England. But that's leatherleaf viburnum, which is viburnum reticillum, and it's zones 5 to 8. I will say that this looks almost tropical-like in appearance. It has a very kind of a tannish, muscular stem to it, multi-stemmed shrub that has these long leaves that are dark green, very heavily veined, very almost rhino hide like. It's got that really intense texture to the outside of the leaves, and then the underside has a lovely tannish silver fuzz to it. So, much like the willow in the growing season, when the wind catches this shrub, you kind of get that, oh, I'm green. No, I'm silver. No, I'm green, back and forth. And it really has a nice movement to the garden. But this is a big boy. This gets 10 to 15 feet tall and about 8 to 10 feet wide. It is about that size in my garden right now. It's a big shrub, but because it has almost this tropical Aurelia look to it, I always assumed, and mostly having seen it on the West Coast, in Oregon and into Washington, this was going to struggle, much like, large-leaved rhododendrons do here in New England. I assumed the second it got cold, those leaves were going to curl up into kind of a sad state and just look like, oh God, do you need water? What do you need? I'm not sure. But this viburnum does not do that at all. It will drop some leaves, especially during extended periods of cold. When we fall into the negative, Fahrenheit temperature range for 1, 2, 3 weeks at a time, in the rare occasions that has happened, it has dropped some leaves. But it usually maintains 2/3, if not more, of its leaf mass throughout the winter. Come spring, some of those leaves will drop off. It pushes new growth. You really don't even notice that transition from new growth to old growth, which is really, really interesting. It gets beautiful, almost lace cap hydrangea-like white flowers that are umbel-shaped in spring, usually mid to late spring. Pollinators love it. You know how they love that umbel shape, with the sterile florets. They just go bananas. And then those give way to bright red berries, which the birds, for the most part, seem to leave alone. And I don't know why. They must be unappetizing or something along those lines. They wait until they're almost overripe, and then that's when they turn black, and then I'll start to see the blue jays all over and just picking apart those leaves or those berries, and the squirrels too. But really, other than some minor leaf drop for extended periods of really, really cold weather, this evergreen shrub performs better than a lot of the broadleaf evergreens that I've become accustomed to in the gardening world, and I was pleasantly surprised by it. So again, that's Leatherleaf viburnum, and if you're in zones 5 to 8, you're in the game. Okie dokie, Carol. All this winter's worst talk. I'm feeling a little guilty talking about winter's worst because we haven't had a horrible winter thus far. We had a late start to the winter here in New England, but I mean, fingers crossed. I feel like I might have just jinxed it. But let's see what else we got on the list here.
All right. So I have another plant that I came across on that my Ontario trip, and this one could have been in our last episode, Winter Stunners, or this episode, Plants for Winter's Worst, because it's stunning, but it's also extremely, extremely cold hardy and durable. It is golden Scots pine. That's Pinus sylvestris aurea, and that is hardy from zones 3 to 7. So it's like, wherever you are, Canada, Siberia, I think you can grow this, but not so much in the deep south, not so much in the southern Midwest, because it really is a plant that it has no problem with winter's worst, summer's worst, heat, humidity. It is not going to love those conditions. Straight species of this plant is the only pine that is native to Great Britain. And so that gives you sort of an idea of what kind of habitat it likes. And it's slow growing. So the aurea is the cultivar that turns bright gold in winter. It's sort of just a normal conifer color in the summer, green, maybe a little hint of blue in it. But as you go into winter, it turns bright gold, and y'all just have to go to the show notes and take a look at that photo, because I got it right in the middle of winter. And it is school bus yellow, but in the best possible way, just this great color, and the texture. It's not like the wispy white pine kind of needles. It's the short, sort of bristly looking pine needles in little clusters against this bark that is kind of the older the tree gets, the more distinctive it is. But it's like an orange or reddish flaky bark. So you have the gold needles against this colorful bark. It is really quite a show. The specimen that they had at the Toronto Botanic Garden was quite big and mature. It is, as a young plant, it will only get about 4 feet tall in 10 years and not quite as wide. But eventually, and there's really no such thing as a dwarf conifer. If you get enough time, eventually it can get up to 30 to 45 feet tall with a 12-foot spread. So again, more narrow, that, and nice and tall, elongated shape. And
if you are a younger listener and you plant this tree, you need to, you need to plan ahead. Now, for older people like us, don't worry about it. You don't have to have that much space.
Right, but at least plant it at least 12 feet away from your house, because you don't want this thing touching your house. But yeah, it will get tall eventually. Yeah, it's a plant that likes cooler climates. The problems in the south include disease pressure, pests. The soils in the south can be problematic, and then, as I mentioned, it does not love heat and humidity. But like if you're up here in the north, just give it full sun, moist, acidic, well-drained soil, and it's really other than that, is pretty carefree. Yeah, I mean, I need some conifers, and I just love the idea of having that different color at a different time of year. So, and you had one in the last episode that did this sort of color switcheroo too. So
yeah, that was a fir. Yeah, an Abies that did that, a white concolor. I do like colorful conifers, and especially ones that are tough. I feel like, I don't know, a lot of people sometimes write into us and tell us that they've been burned by, these crazy variegated conifers and these really, really kooky, cultivars, but, a hardy, a tough as nails conifer that just has all those good attributes and lights on fire school bus yellow in winter. I mean, sign me up. I'm there. If you find out where it is, Carol, this spring shopping season, let me know. Send me a text, because I'll probably want one too. All right. And so continues my one-woman crusade to bring junipers the respect that they deserve. I'm going to talk about another juniper. Feel free to skip ahead about 4.5 minutes, people, if you don't want to hear me go on and on about a juniper again. But listen, there's a reason. We've talked about this, that they are planted in every parking lot strip known to man. And that is because these are tough plants. Hit it with a snowplow? Oh, no problem. I'll just put on another branch over here. Dump 3 tons worth of salt on it from the road? That's fine. I'm okay. I'm a juniper. I'm going to keep going on. Dry, desiccating winds? Nah, no worries. Wet puddles, probably not the best for a juniper, but really any conifer that's going to sit in, a frozen puddle for 5 months out of the year, it's not going to do well. I don't know of many conifers that would, but if there was one that was going to make it through there, it would probably be a juniper. So this is blue chip juniper. It's Juniperus horizontalis blue chip. It's basically a new version of blue rug juniper that everybody's probably very familiar with. The thing that makes this particular cultivar that I've had for a while now different is it's got smaller needles that are a little more like scale-like in appearance, and more of a almost dissected branch to it. So it doesn't just look like this, thick blue carpet. It's got some character and some, twistiness and an ornateness to the branches that kind of hug the ground. Full sun, lean, dry, well-drained soil. So crummy conditions, roadside, put it there, because that's where mine is, and it's doing fantastic. This guy is pretty small, only about 1 foot tall, or 10 to 12 inches tall. So, stays fairly small and around 6 feet wide. I think that's generous. I've had mine for several years now, and it is barely maxing out at 2.5 feet wide. So it's a slow grower for sure, which I think is also what differentiates it a bit from that typical blue rug juniper. Because blue rug juniper, if it's been in the ground for 5 years, that baby is taken over the hillside, but not blue chip. Junipers are bomb proof. I already kind of talked about it, but this one has a beautiful little blue needle to it. And then it's really awesome because as soon as we hit January and some consistent cold temps, so wherever you may be, if that happens in November for you, what you're going to notice is the blue needles start to turn a plum purple color. Now, this isn't like me making up colors and really all it looks like is a dark brown and I say that's plum or purple. It is truly genuinely purple plum color. I showed a beautiful picture of it in my garden right now. I actually love pairing it with, I have a juga nearby, so that chocolatey purple leaf really offsets that purple winter color. But I would say, no matter the condition, mine is up front where it gets piled with snow, where there's salt spray from road treatments, in full sun, lean soil, and it does amazingly well. I think you couldn't go wrong with many junipers, but I just have to sing the praises of this blue chip juniper. It's a winner. All right, Carol, we are coming to the end of winter's worst. I wish we were coming to the end of winter, but not quite yet. But the episode we are. So last plant, last but not least.
Last but not least. So I'm going with one that's, I don't know, it's kind of an ordinary garden plant, but I think very useful for people that have rough winters, and that is Siberian iris. Iris siberica, zones 3 to 9. So again, super, super hardy. It grows 3 to 4 feet tall. It gets 2 to 3 feet wide. It likes full sun to partial shade and average to wet soil. This is another one that's really useful if you have a wet spot, rain garden, anything like that. You can just jam some Siberian iris in there. They will be just fine with it. They do not mind standing water even sometimes. They get late spring to early summer flowers, and I think a lot of people complain that brief window of flowers just not worth growing this plant, right? But I think
I take it with those people.
They come in such amazing colors, right? And this is a time of year when you can really use just a little jolt of color because you're done with the spring flowering bulbs mostly at this point in the season, but you're not yet into perennial season. So for me, that's in May, and it's the Siberian iris are really the main color in my garden at that point, which is nice. It's just nice to have. So the rest of the year, though, they have these very durable grass-like leaves. The foliage is clumped. It's like lush clumps of this grassy foliage and super tough. And so it's more like a texture the rest of the year. And it makes these sort of attractive little, almost tulip-shaped dark brown seed pods. And if you leave those up, they'll stay up all winter long. And I think they look kind of cute. Sometimes I leave them, sometimes I don't. But it's fine with poor soil. It's fine with, sandy soil, which is what I mostly have. I have it planted out next to the street, where there used to be, they've done drainage work since, but there used to be this like enormous puddle that would just every time a car drove through it, the water would wash into my garden bed. And this Siberian iris was just fine with that. It was fine with the sandy, salty stuff that the plow would throw on it. No problem. It's a tough plant.
That's awesome.
Good for erosion control. And I have had problems with iris borers in other, more of the German irises, but this seems untroubled by the iris borers, or if they're eating it, they're not eating enough of it that I noticed. So
that's always good. That's always good. I feel like it's a safe bet to choose any plant that has Siberia in its name as a tough plant, at least as far as winter is concerned. That may be totally wrong, but I feel like in my brain that makes sense for some reason. So I just started thinking about what is that plant that's going to come back for me. And for me, it's Biokovo geranium, hardy geranium, zones 5 to 9. It really does well wherever. It's an everywhere plant. It does well in full sun. It does well in partial shade. If you push it into a little bit more shade, it does well there too. 6 to 10 inches tall, 18 to 24 inches wide, beautiful little lily pad-like leaves that come cooler temps. Those tend to turn a red plum color. That's what the picture on our podcast notes look like. In spring, really beautiful, late spring, early spring, wherever you may live, it might be a little bit different. It gets this beautiful whitish pink little cute star-like flowers, completely covers the plant, lasts for weeks and weeks and weeks, and then sporadic blooming all through summer. So really great. Does it get dry winter weather? It does fine. Does it get winter wet? It does fine. Here's the best part. One year it sat in a frozen puddle, my clump that I had. It died out in the middle, but then it had all of these babies, these radial kind of offsets off of it. So I ended up with 6 plants instead of 1 the next winter. So really, I feel like this is a pretty standard perennial that just does well no matter what. So if you're worried about a plant coming back over the winter, don't worry about this one. Biokovo hardy geranium, which is geranium cantabrigiense, Biokovo, zones 5 to 8, you don't have to worry about it. It's coming back, baby.
And now, because everything sounds better with a British accent, here's Peter to talk about hardiness.
What does it mean to truly be hardy with a capital H? I was reading through some recent emails sent in by listeners of this podcast, and one in particular stood out. While the gardener complimented us on our programme, they also took issue with the hardiness zones we list for each of the plants discussed. The listener writes, hardy, a plant word that does not actually mean anything, is used too often. Hardiness, so-called, is not relevant in most of the country, lamenting that these designations are only applicable to gardeners in an area within 200 miles of the coasts. While I'm no botanist, nor climatologist, I beg to differ. Hardiness zones were developed by the United States Department of Agriculture and are based on the average annual minimum temperature in a given geographic area, a factor relevant to the survival of many plants. Now, is this the only factor to consider in determining whether or not I can grow a specific plant? No. But is it an excellent starting point in narrowing down my available plant options? Absolutely. For instance, I love Gunnera. It's a giant herbaceous perennial that looks like it should be sold along with the Stegosaurus dinosaur. It's prehistoric looking and incredibly dramatic. It likes moist, rich soil, which I have. It does best in partial shade, which I also have. But it is designated as a zone 7 to 10 plant. I'm a zone 5/6 gardener. So in narrowing down my plant selections, I'm better off buying a plant that is hardier. A good definition of hardy is the ability to endure difficult conditions. And we acknowledge that temperatures are not the only category of conditions, difficult or not, that a plant faces. There is soil pH, sun exposure, root competition, fog cover, salt spray, high elevation, the list goes on and on. And although we would love to delve into the conditions of each and every gardener's exact geolocation, it would be impossible within the confines of a 40-minute programme. Instead, we provide you with a baseline to use as a jumping-off point for further research. After all, doesn't half the fun of gardening actually come from learning about new plants, techniques and designs? I certainly think so.
That Peter is always entertaining. Know who else is? Our expert.
Hi, this is Ann Newcomer in Boise, Idaho. I go by the call sign of Idaho Gardener. And the gals at Fine Gardening asked me if I would share my list of plants for winter's worst. Since I just got through with Satan's worst, with the hottest summer on record, I thought, well, sure, I can do winter's worst. Theoretically, we're in zone 7, according to the USDA charts. However, I've chosen to use that simply as a guideline, and I've stuck pretty hard with zone 6 as my rule of thumb for winters. My short list of plants, well, I'm only allowed 4 anyway, so that's short. My short list of plants for winter's worst includes my absolute favorite, tall bearded iris, serviceberry, the shrub, blue shag, eastern white pine, and snowball viburnum. One of my all-time favorite perennials, absolutely favorite, old-timey, perfect, tough as nails. May it live forever in my garden and in my life. The tall iris, often called tall German bearded iris or Iris germanica. I love the ones that are over 30 inches tall, and they have to smell wonderful. Most of them smell like grape bubble gum, although I haven't had any of that in a while, but that's what they smell like to me. My grandmother grew them. My great aunts grew them. Everybody I know grows them. My buddy Kelly Norris had his own iris pasture or nursery when he was a teenager. But I love the ones that smell really good. They can take incredible heat. They're good to zone 3, which is probably at least minus 40 degrees. They don't do anything until after the snow is gone. They can take the heat, they can take the drought. Mostly they can take the winter and give me something to look forward to next spring. I highly recommend them. Tall, bearded iris. Next on my list, another heirloom that I just love. And again, it's one I grew up with. It was in my grandmother's garden. And that is snowball viburnum. They're absolutely stunning come spring, but they don't seem to be phased by minus 25 degree weather. Now, it hasn't been that cold here in 20 some years, but it has been that cold. They have lasted fine with sustained 20 below, so I would say go for it. They also don't seem to be the least bit bothered by heavy snow loads. If it does break off a couple of limbs, they will continue to bloom anyway. Also, once they're established, they're very drought tolerant. And the big white puffy blooms, about 3 or 4 inches in diameter, there's nothing quite like them in the spring. They're absolutely beautiful. There's a sterile version, Viburnum opulus sterile. My choice for winter's worst for a shrub or very small tree is autumn brilliance serviceberry or Amelanchier grandifolia. It's a cultivar of or related to our Idaho native Amelanchier alnifolia. I hope I didn't ruin that by saying it for you. Our cultivar only grows to about 10 feet tall, the native serviceberry. Make a note of the fact that this beautiful autumn brilliance can get to 20 feet tall. It's still hardy zones 4 through 9, which means it can go to about 20 below, and that's necessary in many parts of the mountain states. I think it can even go lower than that, but I won't promise it. The spring plant has darling little fringed-like white flowers with 7, maybe 9 little white petals. They give way to exquisite pink, becoming navy blue berries that are delicious. They're used sometimes in jams, and I've even had a piece of serviceberry pie. But you'll be lucky to get any of the berries because they're also beloved by wildlife, especially the birds. We grow this plant at the Idaho Botanical Garden, and I don't think we've ever been able to get enough to make a single jar of jam. Autumn Brilliant Serviceberry is my choice for a shrub. My choice for a conifer, my 4th choice, period, is the eastern white pine cultivar called blue shag. I think that's because it has a tiny bit of a blue cast to the long, beautiful needles. It doesn't do that much here in terms of that blue cast, but it's an exquisite conifer shrub anyway here. Holds up just fine, believe it or not, in full sun with a southwest exposure here at my place in Boise with those dreadful 110-degree summers. Blue shag white pine I first saw on a garden tour and was enamored with the beautiful long needles and how soft they were. And it made such a nice shrub along a path. I had to have it. I'm on my third one. I have a total of 3 now. And I'm just crazy about it. Disregard what they say about it only gets to maybe 5 feet in diameter and 5 feet tall. Mine are both about 6 by 6. That's not a huge difference, but if it's important to you, you might want to make a note of it. It can do zones 4 through 9, so it should be able to take -20. I've not grown that under that cold of temperatures here, but I think it would be all right. It has done better than expected here in Boise. It could actually take and might even appreciate some afternoon shade. Mine, all 3 of them they do get some afternoon shade now, not until late in the day, maybe 4:30 in the afternoon. And I do think it probably helps them a little bit. They are very, very low maintenance. You might need to snip a branch back out of the way if it's planted near a path or an area that you will need to access. It's low in water requirements and just does really, really well. We do knock off, if there is a heavy snow load, we do keep an eye on that, but you could wrap it up with some burlap. We've never had to. We had a very funny spring here last May where we had 6 inches of snow overnight, and it didn't seem to bother it one bit. So the beautiful blue shag eastern white pine is my choice for the hardy evergreen shrub for this part of the country and the Rocky Mountains.
So Mary Ann is from a place where they get super bad winter weather. So I felt like, if she says something is okay for winter's worst, then I believe her. I will believe her.
Me too.